For 3 decades, Johnny Carson was the nightly mirror reflecting American stardom. He was the anchor, the professional, the polite Midwesterner who somehow managed to keep the biggest, brightest, and most volatile egos in Hollywood in line. Every celebrity craved a seat on his couch because an appearance meant validation, relevance, and access to millions of living rooms. But the real show happened when the cameras were dark, the microphone was off, and the curtain was drawn. This is not a list of stars who told bad jokes or had high demands. This is a roster of people who failed Carson's character test. A simple test. How do you treat the people who hold the door, who fetch the coffee, and who adjust the lights? The people who possess no power over your career. These are the 9 famous faces Johnny Carson knew were faking it. Orson Welles, the genius who shattered the schedule. Orson Welles was a creative titan, a legend whose brilliance was unquestionable. But his ego, by the time he appeared on The Tonight Show in the 1970s, had swelled past the point of professional decency. Carson's problem wasn't Welles' stories. It was his utter refusal to respect the structure of television. The difficulty began before he even arrived. Tonight Show writers would carefully research and prepare a detailed list of potential questions, designed to maximize the impact of the 7-minute segment. Welles, however, would famously cross out every single question. He viewed the prepared material as pedestrian or obvious, forcing Carson to walk into the interview cold, with zero framework for a notoriously expansive and long-winded talker. The defining frustration came with the clock. On one memorable occasion, Welles was scheduled for a precise 7-minute spot. He stayed for nearly 25 minutes. He ignored every subtle professional cue. Carson, a master of the gentle pivot, gave him. The segment became a rambling monologue, forcing the director to make frantic, last-minute cuts. 2 other paid guests, often younger actors desperate for the exposure, were completely bumped from the show. Welles's disdain extended to the crew. He was described as refusing to speak directly to production assistants. Instead, he would address them in the third person, even if they were standing right beside him. Tell the boy to adjust the microphone, or ask the girl for more water. This dehumanization of staff was a glaring sign to Carson. Carson, a stickler for professional excellence and respecting the medium, was reportedly livid. He later told Ed McMahon, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." For Carson, Welles was a cautionary tale, a man whose talent had been eclipsed by a monstrous, self-indulgent ego. Zugabber was beloved for her over-the-top, glamorous persona, a caricature of European aristocracy and celebrity excess. On camera, it was entertaining. Backstage, it became a logistical nightmare that showed zero respect for the Tonight Show operation. Her contract writer was infamous among the crew, reading more like a satirical parody of celebrity demands. A precise temperature of 74 degrees in her dressing room. Perrier with exactly 3 ice cubes. Fresh flowers, specifically orchids only, no carnations. Ultimate professional insult demanding that no female guests younger than 40 be booked on her same episode. When these demands weren't met exactly, Gaber would famously refuse to leave her dressing room, throwing the entire, tightly planned production schedule into chaos. The crew, the band, and the other guests would be forced to wait. The most notorious moment involved the makeup department. Arriving late, Gaber discovered they did not have her preferred specific brand of foundation. She allegedly initiated a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent immediately to Beverly Hills to purchase the product. This was too much. Carson was forced to intervene directly, calling her dressing room. He reportedly kept his cool, saying something like, honey, you look beautiful already. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." But the exasperation was clear. The constant lateness and disruptive behavior cost the network and the crew time and money. Carson reportedly quipped after one appearance, "I'd rather interview a cat. At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting." Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford embodied golden age Hollywood glamour, perfect posture, immaculate appearance, and practiced charm. But backstage, she was described as one of the coldest people ever to visit the studio. What chilled Carson most was Crawford's ability to instantaneously transition between personas. During commercial breaks, she would sit stone-faced, unmoving, and utterly silent, refusing to engage with anyone. The moment the red light flashed, she would instantly reanimate with warmth, laughter, and spontaneous charm. One producer noted, "She was like a machine pretending to be a woman. Nothing was real." The incident that revealed her true darkness involved a young 20-year-old production assistant. When the assistant accidentally entered the dressing room with water, Crawford reportedly exploded into a vicious tirade. According to multiple witnesses, she allegedly called the young woman brainless b***tech and suggested she find work elsewhere, where incompetence might be an asset. The assistant fled the studio in tears. Crawford then demanded the assistant be fired. The producer refused, but the tension remained. When Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, was published years later, detailing alleged abuse, Carson was not surprised. He reportedly simply nodded, confirming, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every word." He knew the performance was a mask for genuine cruelty. Frank Sinatra was a music icon, and Carson respected his talent deeply. He did not respect the apparatus of fear and intimidation that traveled with him. Sinatra's appearances were notorious for the tension they brought. He would arrive with a massive entourage, often described by staff as not show business types, but rather men you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. These men would fan out across the studio floor, creating an atmosphere that one cameraman described as being under surveillance. The ultimate breach of conduct occurred when a floor manager, an older man who had served in the Korean War, gave Sinatra the standard 3-minute cue. In a brazen act of humiliation, Sinatra allegedly grabbed the man by his tie and pulled him close, delivering a low, menacing threat. "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The manager was visibly shaken. Carson witnessed the interaction from his office monitor. He nearly canceled the entire segment, but was convinced to continue for the ratings. A final confrontation occurred during a commercial break when Sinatra made a disparaging comment about a female staff member's appearance. Breaking his usual professional detachment, Carson reportedly responded coldly, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The personal contempt Carson harbored for the singer's bullying cemented his decision to limit Sinatra to once a year maximum, a rare personal veto of a ratings giant. Jerry Lewis. Lewis was an undisputed star, a groundbreaking comedian, and a beloved humanitarian whose telethons raised millions for charity. This stark contrast between his tireless public championing of children and his alleged private contempt for his professional colleagues is what elevated him to the top of Carson's blacklist. Unlike some difficult guests, Lewis made no secret of his disdain, even for Carson. He would repeatedly talk over the host, hijack questions, and most famously, violate the unspoken rule of the show by reaching over and adjusting Carson's tie without permission, a clear power play. Carson, who was extremely guarded about his personal space, was reportedly livid. Lewis' treatment of the crew was consistently demeaning. He often refused to learn names, addressing seasoned professionals as "Hey, you or camera guy." The most infamous example of his pettiness came during a rehearsal when a camera operator quietly coughed due to allergies. Lewis stopped everything and launched into a screaming tirade, demanding the man be removed, claiming the professional was breathing like an amateur. The Jekyll and Hyde routine utterly disgusted Carson. One producer recalled, "He'd watch Jerry cry on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were subhuman." After Lewis' final appearance in the early 1980s, Carson's instruction to his executive producer was simple and final: never again. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was true Hollywood royalty, a box office giant from a bygone era. Unfortunately, his visits in the 1970s and 80s became notorious for his chaos, intoxication, and inappropriate conduct toward women. Rooney, then in his 50s and 60s, developed a reputation among young female staff for unwanted touching and suggestive comments. Multiple accounts detail young production assistants asking to be reassigned when they saw his name on the schedule. He would try to pull them closer, hold a hand just a little too long, and ignore professional boundaries. Carson reportedly told his producer he thinks being short gives him license to be a pervert. Rooney also appeared visibly intoxicated during several tapings, slurring words and losing his train of thought. During one infamous 1977 segment, he launched into a vulgar and inappropriate anecdote about Judy Garland, forcing Carson to abruptly interrupt and transition to commercial. The ultimate mark of Carson's displeasure came after an appearance where Rooney made repeated, demeaning comments about a young actress who was also a guest that night. Carson took the unusual and personal step of apologizing to her backstage. He told his director, "I've never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest's behavior." This incident ensured Rooney's appearances became extremely limited thereafter. Jane Russell. Jane Russell, one of Hollywood's most iconic sex symbols, should have been a staple guest. Yet her appearances stopped abruptly in the early 1970s, a rare definitive move by Carson that signaled a deep professional and personal disagreement. While Carson was politically moderate, he maintained a strict policy of neutrality on the air. Russell, however, reportedly used backstage interactions to express increasingly hardline, discriminatory views. She allegedly became notorious for making disparaging comments about LGBT staff members. During one appearance, Russell reportedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement, a deeply humiliating and discriminatory act that violated Carson's professional standards. The ultimate offense came when she allegedly refused to be booked on the same episode as Rock Hudson, making derogatory comments about his sexuality, which, though not publicly confirmed at the time, was known within Hollywood circles. Carson, who had many gay friends and staff members, viewed this behavior as intolerable discrimination. Russell's abrupt disappearance from the guest roster was one of the clearest cases where Carson personally vetoed future bookings, regardless of her star power. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters was a two-time Oscar winner, accomplished, experienced, and full of stories. She was also one of Carson's most unpredictable and volatile guests, earning the quote, "Shelley doesn't talk, she detonates." Winters refused to respect the light entertainment format of the show. She would frequently hijack simple questions and launch into intense political diatribes or raw, deeply personal revelations that left Carson visibly struggling to transition to a commercial break. The director noted, "It was like trying to steer a tornado." Her infamous reputation for physical outbursts, including throwing a glass of whiskey at a fellow guest on a British talk show, made the Tonight Show crew nervous. Staff members would take the precaution of removing certain items from the set before her segments. Anything that could be thrown or knocked over would mysteriously disappear. While her unpredictability created logistical and professional nightmares, Carson maintained a small measure of respect for her authenticity. Unlike the calculating Crawford, Winters genuinely believed in her passionate causes. Yet the constant professional liability meant her appearances became less and less frequent. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was an actress of unquestionable brilliance, known for her sharp wit and elegance. But backstage, she became famous for a terrifying level of verbal aggression that was directed at anyone she deemed slow, incompetent, or a threat. Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon that Davis doesn't need a stage, she needs a courtroom. She would frequently interrupt and talk over younger guests, especially women, sometimes physically turning her back on them during their stories. Her aggression was not limited to fellow stars. Davis began berating a cue card holder during a rehearsal for being too slow. This was the moment Carson, usually detached, stepped in. He walked over and very quietly delivered the rare, definitive warning, "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." Unused to being challenged, the legend backed down. Despite her talent, the energy required to manage Davis was simply too high. After her final appearance in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his producer that the emotional cost was too great. "That's the last time. Life's too short to spend it being verbally flogged by Bette Davis." Johnny Carson's private judgments about these 9 legends, Crawford, Sinatra, Lewis, Wells, Aber, Rooney, Russell, Winters, and Davis, offer a unique, unfiltered glimpse into the reality of American celebrity. He had no need to invent these stories. He had everything to lose and nothing to gain by criticizing these powerful figures. His only concern was the professional integrity of his show and the well-being of his staff. Carson's power as a professional gatekeeper gave him a unique perspective. For 30 years, the most celebrated people on earth had to walk past his camera crew, his writers, and his production assistants, and it was always how they treated the lowliest member of the crew that determined their true character. These 9 celebrities may have mastered the performance for the camera, but they utterly failed the test of basic professional decency, cementing their place on the only blacklist that truly mattered, the private, unforgiving ledger of America's greatest host.